Hey everybody, it's your buddy Connor. You're probably kind of confused right now because I am not playing a video game of some kind. And that's because I'm trying something new. Back in the day, if you haven't been with the channel very long, we used to have someone who did movie reviews, but he has since gone his own separate way, and we haven't had that on the channel in a while. So, I am going to attempt to revive those movie reviews, at least in some small part. And I figured, what would be a more appropriate way to begin than with what was supposed to be one of the biggest cinema events of the decade? That's right, we're reviewing Cats. No, we're gonna have something a lot less divisive and controversial. We're gonna talk about Star Wars. So, as a start, I am going to start spoiler-free as much as I can. I feel like there are a lot of portions of this movie that you can't really talk about without being kinda spoilery. So, the first couple minutes I will be talking just overview, simple stuff, and then after that I'll put up a spoiler warning and we'll get into more spoilery territory. So for now, no need to worry. If you've been living under a rock and need a quick refresher, The Rise of Skywalker is the third movie in the sequel trilogy of the Star Wars movies. It is the 9th mainline Star Wars movie and the 11th overall movie in the whole franchise. The other two from the 9 mainline being, of course, Rogue One and Solo. This movie picks up an unspecified amount of time shortly after the events of The Last Jedi. The Resistance is now fighting desperately to try and stop the First Order, led by Supreme Leader Kylo Ren, and Rey seeks to complete her Jedi training. This movie was promised to be a lot of things. Particularly, we were told that it would be the true end cap to a generation, the big grand finale of the Skywalker saga. Is it those things? Yes, it is an ending. And I have thoughts. So I figured I would start with a tiny little bit of context from me in going into this personally. I liked The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. I know that statement can get me crucified depending on who I say it to, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend that The Force Awakens wasn't just a fun Star Wars movie. Yeah, it was a little derivative and touched a lot of points in the story that they did in A New Hope, but it was also just different enough with new characters and new arcs and some new set pieces that it still stood alone. It wasn't a complete rehash like some people say it was. Yeah, it had the same kind of skeleton, but everything filling it in was still different. And The Last Jedi, look, The Last Jedi was a deeply flawed, but still interesting movie that did some really cool stuff with the story. I personally thought it could have been like half an hour shorter, and there were a lot of weird decisions made. It wasn't a perfect movie, but it's by no means a bad movie. There's a lot of really cool stuff in it. But I'll kind of get more into that toward the end of the video. Needless to say, I was a fan of the first two movies in the sequel trilogy, to at least some extent. So going into this one, I don't want to say I had high expectations or high hopes, but I was really rooting for this movie to at least be an entertaining one, because everybody was kind of worried what Disney would do after the backlash that came from The Last Jedi. And boy howdy, do I have some notes. So I've got some bullet points and some notes here. I'm not using like a script or anything. You know, who needs a script? So to start off, immediate reaction after the credits rolled was a lot of mixed emotions. I had avoided spoilers almost entirely, but some of the non-spoiler reviews that I'd seen, even the ones that, they tried real hard to be as generic as possible, I had my concerns about what they did with the movie. Again, because the backlash following The Last Jedi. Let's start with the pros. Pro number 1, the movie looks fantastic. This is Disney. This movie has no right not looking good, not looking polished, but it does. It looks great. The CGI is really well done and well integrated. All the effects look fantastic. The set design, the scene design, everything just looks great. It is an extremely visually appealing movie, and I think that lines up perfectly with how the last several movies have looked. Star Wars hasn't looked awful at all for this entire sequel trilogy. Transitioning straight from looking good, pro number 2, the action is really good. There were a lot of parts of this movie that I question how I was feeling at the time, but I have no question in my mind that during any of the action scenes, I was on the edge of my seat for the most part. And this movie has what I think might be one of my favorite lightsaber battles in kind of the about 2/3 of the way through the movie. We get a confrontation between Kylo Ren and Rey. And again, this should hopefully not be spoilers, but it's a fantastic lightsaber fight. And it's one of my favorite of the whole series. And it's something that I've really appreciated when it came to the sequel trilogy in general. None of the lightsaber battles are overdone. Now, that's not to say that lightsaber fights have ever looked bad, but some of them are way better than others. Yeah, episode 1 had the Duel of the Fates, and that was a pretty awesome fight. But Revenge of the Sith, okay, I'm gonna level with you. I personally think the confrontation between Obi-Wan and Anakin is over-choreographed. It's busy, it's kind of messy almost. This was a confrontation that we had been waiting to see for decades. The fight between Obi-Wan Kenobi and the now corrupted Anakin Skywalker, who has become Darth Vader. It feels too busy. I mean, look at this. That's just excessive. Look, I know people really try to make Revenge of the Sith be the one prequel movie that was decent, and it was better than the other two, but it was still not that good by any means. But the lightsaber combat in the sequel trilogy just feels cleaner. There's no overused choreography. It all flows so nicely. The fight in The Force Awakens between Rey, Finn, and Kylo Ren is honestly probably tied for my favorite lightsaber battle with the one between Rey and Kylo Ren in The Rise of Skywalker. It's just such a well done battle of two weaker combatants trying to overwhelm a more experienced opponent. It's just really well done, and I don't think I can sing its praises any more than I already have. So yeah, the action in Rise of Skywalker is super good. The final climactic space battle was really cool. I've always liked watching X-Wings and Y-Wings fly around and blow up TIE fighters and space stations. It's hard to hate that kind of stuff when it's done so well. And truth be told, that kind of brings us to pro number 3, but also kind of a con. The movie is very safe. So this is a pretty standard and safe Star Wars movie. The Last Jedi tried a lot of new things. Rian Johnson really tried to push the series out of its comfort zone. Again, I liked some of that, but a lot of people didn't. So when I say a safe movie, it means it didn't seem like they took a lot of risks with anything. We've got tons of callbacks, tons of fan service, and that's not a bad thing. I am a sucker for good fan service. And when we get into spoilers, I'm going to talk about some really cool fan service. I just wish they would have built upon what The Last Jedi had done better, instead of trying to just go back to the way things were. Like, this is where we start getting, I can't talk about the pros without talking about the cons and then falling into spoilers. So, to heck with it, let's move on with the con. Non-spoiler con number 1, terrible pacing. So one of the biggest flaws of the movie is its pacing. The first 2/3 are just breakneck speed. You go from scene to scene to scene to scene. And I personally felt like I was never able to really absorb a lot of what was happening. I was still thinking about things that happened 2 scenes before, and now we're 2 scenes farther ahead than we were just a second ago. A lot happens, and it just makes it feel like this movie should have been another 20 to 30 minutes long. And that's kind of funny, because I always feel like The Last Jedi should have been like 20 to 30 minutes shorter. This one needed to be longer. We needed a few minutes to make transitions feel a little more natural, or just sit on a scene a little longer. And the movie is about 2 hours and 22 minutes, and I really feel like they should have gone for the 3-hour mark. Like, we just had Avengers Endgame, and that was a 3-hour movie, and that movie made billions. You can get away with a 3-hour Star Wars movie. People will watch it. But then, 2/3 of the way through the movie, the pacing comes to a screeching halt and becomes something more normal. And this in and of itself is even more jarring, because we're going from over the top quick as possible to a more standard story pacing. And it's really unfortunate, because the first part of this movie, especially the first like 20-30 minutes, has some really cool sequences that I would have loved even more if they hadn't just felt like they were cut and paste right next to each other with almost no transitional material. They really were trying to fit a lot in. They had a lot of story they wanted to try and fit in. And that kind of leads into non-spoiler con number 2, retconning. So a word that's been getting thrown around with this movie is retcon. And they did retcon quite a bit. If you're unfamiliar with the term, you're basically going back and changing the story after the fact in one way, shape, or form. Some of them are small things. Some of them are kind of bigger things. Some of them are very out of nowhere things. And you can really tell they were trying to fix things after The Last Jedi. And it bothers me. It bothers me a lot, because rolling with what you've been given is always a better idea than going back and trying to like fill in the blanks, like, well, actually, although this happened, this was what really happened. And it just comes off as kind of desperate. That really pulled me out of the movie, and that also comes to a lot of spoiler discussion. And we can't talk about spoiler discussion right now, but we'll move on to non-spoiler con number 3, direction. So originally I was gonna save this for more toward the end of the video, but it's not really a spoiler. There really was a big lack of direction, not for the Rise of Skywalker necessarily, but for the sequel trilogy as a whole. We had JJ do the first part, Rian Johnson do the second, and now J.J. Abrams is back. And everyone knew that J.J. Abrams hadn't written anything past the first movie. He had set all this stuff up with his usual mystery box style of writing, which isn't a bad thing. He set up some really cool stuff, but then he handed the keys to Rian Johnson, and Rian Johnson had nothing to work with. And so he just said, okay, well, I'm gonna do the best with what I got, and I'm gonna have some fun with it. And now JJ's like, ah, crap, I guess I gotta go back and change all this. Well, you wouldn't have had to if you just laid out the foundation for the series from the get-go. It's like they were filming 3 movies and then tried to put them together retroactively, instead of just writing 3 movies at the same time. George Lucas wrote the prequel trilogy at the same time, and yeah, the prequels sucked, but at least they were cohesive. But that is as far as I'm comfortable going without putting up the spoiler tag. So If you don't want to hear any spoilers, this is the part where you need to jump to this time code. I'll be, kind of wrapping up the video at that point. But yeah, again, this is your spoiler warning. And here we go. Spoiler con number 1. Rey Palpatine. I cannot fully describe how much I hate that Rey turned out to be Emperor Palpatine's granddaughter. It made me sigh in disbelief because I knew, based on the trailers and stuff that the actors and J.J. Abrams had talked about before the movie even came out, that they had decided that Rey is in fact related to someone special. I just thought it would be like Obi-Wan Kenobi or Qui-Gon Jinn, or they were gonna reach out a little ways. No, she's the grandchild of the Emperor. Because the Emperor apparently had kids. Who'da thunk it? This is a cop-out. It is a cheap cop-out to try and draw everything back together. Rey did not need to be related to anyone. I loved that in The Last Jedi they said, your parents are no one. They were scrappers who sold you for drinking money. I thought that was awesome because it made the Force mystical again. And I know I'm not the first person to say this. I watch a few online movie reviewers who said the same thing. It made the Force mystical again because anyone could be strong with the Force. But now, nope. You're only that strong if you're related to one of like 4 people in the entire galaxy. Again, it felt like a cop-out and an ass pull. And I looked over to my buddy when I was watching it and I literally said, did they just do that? And he just went, yup, they certainly did. Spoiler con number 2, retconning. This very much ties in with the Rey Palpatine reveal. They had to go back and change it and make it to where Rey was related to someone. And they drop it so clunkily through the whole movie. There are several moments where Kylo Ren says, I looked in your head and I knew you know the whole story. You know you're lying to yourself. We know what the real story is. Really? Because it sounded like the real story was what we talked about in the last movie. Kylo Ren, he goes back to wearing his mask and they call back the Knights of Ren, but the Knights of Ren don't actually do anything. They're literally just there to be there so they can say that they included him in the movie at some point. They literally just show up for a few scenes and then get murked in the end. And it's really unfortunate because that was one of the most interesting parts of The Force Awakens that I was hoping would be explained. Who were the Knights of Ren? What did they do? What was their significance? Now we have like a stormtrooper makes an offhand remark about them and Kylo Ren calls them his knights. And then they kind of just stand menacingly in the background for most of the movie. And then the one fight scene they're in, they just get dispatched like that. That's some wasted potential. And that legitimately is kind of just what this movie feels like. I told you I'm a sucker for good fan service, but I hate bad fan service, and I hate bad callbacks even more. And that's really what this movie tried to do. JJ was trying so hard to go back to his notes from The Force Awakens, keep as much of the story from The Last Jedi as necessary, and then still write the sequel he wanted to write. And it's really obvious. I have to stop pooping on this movie because these few things just really kill the entirety of the movie. But I think the biggest thing that almost killed it for me emotionally was spoiler con number 3, Leia. I had to really think how I felt about this, but I don't like what they did with Carrie Fisher. Obviously, Carrie Fisher passed away a couple of years ago, so having her in this movie is impossible. She is in the trailers, at least for a couple of scenes and a voiceover. And people thought, well, maybe they were able to get some recording and some footage done before her untimely passing, and they kind of just used what they had and filled in with a little CGI. No, they didn't have anything. They did have leftover footage from The Last Jedi though, and they just cut it into the movie with some CGI for some of the most awkward conversations between characters ever. Space Mom deserves better than this. Like, I don't have any footage, obviously, because the movie is still in theaters and I try not to be a pirate. But if you have already seen the movie, or if you have yet to see it, think about that fact. They are going to seem awkward and forced, and they honestly just made me really upset. Because if it had been my choice, I would have started the movie on a somber note. Leia's funeral, everyone is sad. Rey is heartbroken and devastated. The Resistance weeps. They don't know what they're going to do. Their last great general is gone. Luke Skywalker is gone. And it would have been such a powerful note for the final movie to begin on and really just show the desperation of the Resistance in the face of the First Order. But instead, they decided they wanted to just CGI Carrie Fisher from another movie in. And it's weird. It's real weird. Like, it's also inconsistent with what they've done before. They made an entire CGI Grand Moff Tarkin, but they weren't gonna make an entire CGI Princess Leia. Now don't get me wrong, I wouldn't have wanted them to do an entire CGI Princess Leia. That would have been excessive and unnecessary and honestly kind of insulting to Carrie Fisher's memory. But this just feels half-assed. This just feels awkward. It feels uncomfortable. And you can really tell that Carrie Fisher's role in the film was supposed to be, really big. She was supposed to be the one to help pull Kylo Ren back from the dark side. And they ended up not being able to do that. Instead, they had a pretty heartfelt moment between him and Han Solo. But when Leia passes away in this movie, I actually breathed a sigh of relief because it meant that I didn't have to see them do this weird, awkward thing with Carrie Fisher's memory. Carrie Fisher, you deserve better than this. Rest in peace. You will always be my princess. You were the general we deserved. And talking about Kylo Ren's fall from the dark side, that actually brings me to spoiler pro 1, Kylo Ren. So Kylo Ren has always been one of my favorite parts of these movies. I think he is the best character of the entire sequel trilogy, primarily because he has the most complete arc and the most compelling narrative. And no surprise, I definitely put Rey and Luke as about tied for second best. Kylo Ren is essentially a Sith Lord dealing with the pull from the light side of the Force. We've always seen the dark side as this corrupting influence, and it's usually the Jedi who are corrupted by its power. But in the case of Kylo Ren, we get the opposite. Kylo is trying desperately to lean on the power of darkness, but he's being pulled constantly back to the light by his mother, his father, and of course, Rey. And in the end, Kylo Ren is redeemed. And he wasn't gonna get a happy ending. We all kind of knew he wasn't gonna get a happy ending. The way it ended for him, I will accept because he deserved a good narrative conclusion. And hey, they made Force healing canon, so baller. So I've been talking about this movie for the last 30 minutes. This video is, I'm watching on my computer the timing and it's going way longer than I expected it to, but I just had to talk about a lot of stuff. I have a lot of opinions on these movies, but it's because for the most part I like them so much. The Force Awakens was a breath of fresh air after the prequels, and it just felt so much fun. I've heard some people say that The Force Awakens doesn't hold up on multiple watchings, but honestly, I always find it a good time to sit back and watch. And The Last Jedi, I really do appreciate some of the neat things it tried to do with the narrative and how it tried to repaint some of the characters. It did have a lot of glaring flaws though. It needed to be half an hour shorter, there are entire sections that could just be removed, but overall it was fun. On a final note, I mentioned that I'm a big sucker for fan service done well, and honestly, this movie really got me in the fan service. Early in the movie, we get a scene of Rey training with Leia. She's meditating, trying to reach out and connect with the Jedi of the past, but she doesn't seem to be able to do it, with Leia encouraging her to just keep trying. And then at the end of the movie, we get our expected final confrontation between Rey and Emperor Palpatine. Kylo Ren has been dispatched from the fight, and Rey is out of options. The Emperor is just too strong. But in a final moment of clarity, Rey reaches out to the Force, and she's able to hear the voices of Jedi past. And they didn't just get random voice actors to say random lines, they got all the actors who played major Jedi from the series. This was such a cool moment, and I actually felt kind of emotional watching it because it was just so neat to see Rey finally hit this level of mastery with the Force, and to know that she had the backing of generations of Jedi before her. And of course, in those voices was our one and only princess. I could probably go on for hours, and editing this is probably gonna suck, but that's kind of where I'm at. I don't like the idea of giving a number score because I feel like adding a number to a subjective review adds weird technicalities to subjective media, and so I'm just gonna put it at go see it. Give it a watch. It is absolutely worth your time to see it once. And I will say this now, if you like the movie, good. I'm glad you liked it, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. This is, again, subjective media. This is subjective art. Not everyone's gonna like the same thing, and you are by no means not allowed to enjoy what you enjoy. If you loved The Rise of Skywalker, I'm glad, and tell me why you liked it in the comments. But the fact is, it just wasn't what I was hoping. It wasn't bad, but it really wasn't that great either. It was just kind of middle of the road. The bad wasn't enough to really drag it down, but the good wasn't really enough to save it. Honestly, that's kind of my biggest fear, that this is what the legacy of these final 3 movies is going to be. That they just kind of existed. I think there's a lot of potential that was never really utilized at the end. A lot of story threads that were never touched on. A lot of opportunities to really do something different. They went the safe route. And in the end, it just kind of is. So guys, that's my review of The Rise of Skywalker. I had my notes here and kind of just flew by the seat of my pants. This is actually the second time recording this because for some reason the footage didn't want to work earlier, and it's kind of way later than I thought it would be, and I'm really hoping I can get it edited together and get it out before the end of the night. But if you enjoyed the video, I would love it if you could subscribe to the channel, give us a follow, give me a like. I'm going to try and do this a little more regularly. Especially if this goes over well. Cinema has been something that I've always loved, and I've always liked talking about movies in general and getting people's opinions. So yeah, hopefully this will be a regular thing. Thank you so much for joining me today, everybody. It really meant a lot to me to get this done and get this made. And I guess there's not much more to say other than thank you so much. And like always, have a good one. And remember,
the Force will be with you.